My son called on a Sunday right after I'd taken the sweet potato pies out of the oven to tell me his family had moved 3 states away. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon and browned butter. I had 4 pies cooling on the counter, 2 for the church, repassed 1 for my neighbor, Miss Dorothy, whose hip was acting up, and 1 just because a woman my age is allowed to keep a whole pie for herself if she wants to. I remember the exact yellow of that afternoon light coming through the window over the sink. I remember it because it's the last hour I lived in the old world, the one where I still believed my son loved me more than he loved the idea of getting away from me. "We're in Atlanta now, Mama," he said like he was telling me the score of a ball game. "It all happened fast. You know how it is, we forgot to mention it." Forgot. 64 years I've been on this earth, and I have never once heard of a grown man forgetting to tell his mother he packed up 2 grandchildren and drove them 6 hours down Interstate 85. You don't forget a thing like that. You don't forget to enroll 2 children in a new school, sign a lease hire, movers change your address on 100 accounts, and load a truck in the dark. Every one of those is a decision, and every decision was a moment he could have picked up the phone. He didn't forget. He decided over and over for weeks that I did not matter enough to be told. I stood there in my kitchen with flour on my hands and the phone pressed to my ear, and I could hear it in his voice. That careful rehearsed lightness people use when they've already done the thing they know they shouldn't have. I raised that boy. I know his voice the way I know my own heartbeat. When Darnell is lying, he talks faster, and he laughs at things that aren't funny, and he was doing both. Behind him, my daughter-in-law Vanessa was telling one of the children to be quiet, and there was something in her voice too, a tightness, though I wouldn't understand what it meant for months. Somewhere a moving box scraped across a hardwood floor that I would later learn cost $11 a square foot. "Are the babies all right?" I asked, because that's a grandmother's first question always before pride, before anger. "Did Malik and Zoe get to say goodbye to their friends?" "They're fine, Mama. Kids are resilient." A pause, then quieter like he was already reaching for the door. "Look, I gotta go. The movers are charging by the hour. I'll call you." He would not call me. We both knew it. And I said, "All right, son. You take care." And I hung up before he could hear anything in my voice he might have to feel bad about. He thought he was talking to a sweet old church woman, the one who bakes for the repast after every funeral, the one who sings second soprano and slips folded 20s into her grandbaby's hands. The soft one, the one you could move away from and not even bother to call. What Darnell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he had just told me his brand new life was sitting on ground I owned. Every board of that $11 floor, every dollar that put it there, ran back through a company that had exactly one name on its controlling documents. Mine. He thought he'd already won. He'd gotten away clean into a new city out from under his mother's eyes. He'd already lost standing right there in his penthouse. He just didn't know it yet. People in my church have called me Miss Anna for 30 years, and I let them because the name comes with a picture attached, and the picture has always worked in my favor. Miss Anna who bakes. Miss Anna whose husband Samuel, God rest him, did well for himself in construction before the good Lord called him home in 2016. Miss Anna who has a little money now, bless her heart, from what Sam left behind. Every part of that is wrong except the baking. Sam was a builder and a fine one. He could frame a house faster than any man in Mecklenburg County, and his hands were the best I ever saw. But Sam built what other people told him to build. He worked the jobs. I was the one who looked at the jobs and started asking a different kind of question. We were young when I asked the first one. There was a house on Beatty's Ford Road, a burned-out shell nobody wanted boarded up the yard, grown to the windowsills, a place the whole neighborhood had written off. Sam saw a wreck. I saw $8,000 I'd saved 100 at a time out of a Charlotte hospital laundry paycheck, folding other people's sheets 30 years before I'd fold my own mother's history into a legal trust. And I saw what that wreck could be after Sam's hands got done with it. Sam laughed at me the night I brought it up. Not a mean laugh, a tired one. "Anna, baby, we don't have the money to be somebody's landlord." And I put the passbook on the kitchen table between us, and I let him look at the number, and I said, "We have exactly the money. I've been counting it for 6 years while you were sleeping." He stopped laughing. We bought it. He rebuilt it on nights and weekends, and I kept the books and found the tenants and set the rents and made sure every dollar that came in went somewhere on purpose. 2 years later, we bought the house next door with what the first one earned. Then the one across the street. I learned to read a title search at my own kitchen table with a library book open beside me. I learned which banks would talk to a black woman with a good ledger and which ones never would, and I stopped wasting my time on the ones that never would. After a while, I wasn't buying wrecks anymore. I was buying the whole street and then the next street, and the men at the county office who used to call me sweetheart started calling me Mrs. Whitfield and standing up a little straighter when I walked in. By the time Sam passed in 2016, there was no more Sam's construction money. There was Whitfield Holdings LLC, 41 doors across South and West. Charlotte held clean, managed careful, every one of them worth 4 times what we paid. And there was exactly one person who signed for it, decided for it, and understood the whole shape of it. Not the widow of the man who built the houses, the woman who bought the ground under them. Sam knew it too. On his last good day, he held my hand and said, "You were always the smart one, Anna. Don't let anybody tell you different, especially not our boy." I didn't understand why he said that last part. I understand it now. I never corrected this picture people had of me. Let me tell you why. A black woman my age learns young that the safest thing you can be is underestimated. Nobody guards their hand around a sweet old lady with a pie. Everything I ever protected, I protected by being smaller than I was. That armor kept me safe for 60 years. It's also the exact thing my son used against me. My mama's name was Ruth. She came up out of Mississippi in 1951, part of that long river of folks who rode the trains north and east looking for a country that would let them breathe. She left with almost nothing. You couldn't carry much, and there wasn't much to carry. But she brought one thing folded at the bottom of a cardboard suitcase, and she kept it her whole life, and she left it to me. A quilt, not a store quilt. My great-grandmother pieced it by hand out of the clothes of the dead, a strip from my great-grandfather's Sunday shirt, the one they buried a different man's dreams in, a square of a christening gown 3 babies wore before the 4th one lived, the faded blue of an apron worn to threads by a woman who picked cotton on land she never got paid fair to touch. Every patch in that quilt was a person. Ruth used to sit me on her knee and run her finger along the seams and name them to me one by one, slow like reading a family Bible with no words in it. This here's your Uncle Nathaniel drowned in the Yazoo the summer he turned 19. This blue is your great-aunt Pearl, who could sing so pretty the white folks would pay to hear it and still make her come in the back door. I asked her once when I was maybe 7 why she didn't just buy a new blanket. We were poor, but we weren't quilt out of dead people's clothes. Poor not by then. And my mama looked at me a long time, and she said something I didn't understand until I was old enough to have lost people of my own. "Baby," she said, "this is the only deed my mama ever got to own. They could keep us off the land. They could keep us out the front door and out the good schools and off the voting rolls. They could take near about everything." She smoothed the quilt across both our laps. "They couldn't keep us off each other. Long as I got this, I got my people. Ain't a bank in Mississippi could foreclose on that." When Ruth passed in 1998, that quilt came to me. I kept it folded in cedar in the front room, and I took it out every year on her birthday and named the seams to Malik and Zoe, the way she'd named them to me, so they'd know they came from people who survived on purpose, people who decided to live and passed that decision down hand to hand, patch to patch, all the way to 2 babies playing on my living room floor. Hold on to that quilt. You'll need to know where it ends up. What they did to it is the moment I stopped being able to forgive. Now my family and money. I had one son who lived Darnell, and I loved him the way you love your only living child, which is to say too much and with no breaks. Darnell was smart and he was charming, and somewhere in his 30s he decided the worst thing a man could be was the builder's boy from the West Side. He wanted the watch, the car, the address that meant something. Money to him was never a tool. It was a costume. He wore it to become somebody who'd never sweated in his life. There was a moment years back that should have told me everything. Darnell was maybe 32, and he came to me wanting money to buy into some man's restaurant deal. A sure thing, he said, the way it's always a sure thing. I looked at the papers, and the numbers didn't hold together, and I told him no. Not no never, just no, not this one, not like this. And the look he gave me, I have never forgotten it. It wasn't a boy disappointed in his mother. It was a man appraising an obstacle. For just a second before he smoothed his face back over my own son, looked at me like I was a lock he'd have to figure out how to pick. I told myself I imagined it. Mothers are good at telling themselves they imagined it. He married Vanessa, and I want to be fair about Vanessa because being fair about her matters later more than you know yet. Vanessa grew up poorer than we ever did. The kind of poor where the lights go off and stay off, where a child learns that money is the difference between safe and not safe, warm and not warm home in the car. She wasn't greedy the way Darnell was vain. She was scared down in the bone the way you only get scared when you were a hungry child. She wanted the granite countertops because granite countertops meant the lights would never go off on her babies the way they'd gone off on her. I could never hate a woman for that. I've been that scared girl folding sheets in a hospital basement. I just built something instead of marrying it. Remember that Vanessa is frightened, not cruel. It will matter a great deal later which one of them was which. And I had 2 grandchildren, Malik and Zoe, 10 and 7. And there is no armor over that. None. Those children owned every soft place I had left. Malik has my father's serious eyes and asks 100 questions a day. Zoe hums when she's happy the way my mama used to and doesn't even know she's doing it. I would have laid down in traffic for either one of them. My son knew that about me. He was counting on it. I thought I'd arranged everything the right way. That's the part that shames me most even now. In the spring of 2019, my heart gave out on me a valve the doctor said worn thin, and they opened my chest right down the middle and fixed it. And for a few weeks there I lay in a hospital bed, not sure I'd come out the other side. When you think you might die, you get practical fast. So before the surgery, thinking like a careful woman, I signed a limited power of attorney so Darnell could handle a few property matters while I was under and healing. Sign a lease renewal if one came due. Talk to the county if a permit needed pulling. Keep the water running on the properties literally. Small things, bounded things. The document said so in plain black ink. It named specific ordinary tasks, and it was never ever meant to reach the money. A mother handing her son a single key while she slept, trusting him not to walk the whole house. I trusted my son. That was the most expensive mistake of my life. Here's the thing I want you to understand before I tell you what he did, because it's the hinge the whole story turns on. I was not a helpless woman who got robbed. I was a careful woman who left one door unlocked for the one person I believed would never walk through it. There's a difference. The helpless woman never had a chance. The careful woman had every chance and chose to trust her child. I would spend the next year learning exactly what that trust was worth to him. Because Miss Anna, who bakes pies, is also the woman who 3 years before any of this started, sat across a mahogany desk from an estate attorney and quietly did something she never told a living soul about. But that comes later in its proper place. For now, all you need to know is that when my son decided to move his whole life onto my land without so much as a phone call, he was making a bet. He bet that the picture was the truth, that the soft old woman was all there was. He bet his family on it. I want to be exact about what happened because the exactness is the whole thing. Vague hurt you can argue with. You cannot argue with a number and a date. Here is the number and the date. On the 9th of that month, my accountant called me. Her name is Gloria Banks, and she has kept the books for Whitfield Holdings for 20 years, and she does not call on a Saturday morning to say hello. Anna, she said, I need you to sit down. I was already sitting. I told her so. There's a draw on the Beatty's Ford property, a home equity line, $180,000 taken out in 3 moves over the last 5 weeks. She paused, and I could hear her flipping paper, and I could hear that she'd been up half the night with it. 50,000, then 60, then 70, spaced out, like somebody trying not to trip an alarm. Another pause. And there's a letter here that came to the company P.O. box addressed to the company, which is how it landed on my desk instead of getting buried. A lease guarantee confirmation. From a property management company in Atlanta. Buckhead. It lists you, Anna. It lists you as the personal guarantor on a 24-month residential lease. $6,800 a month. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. I always do. It's the one thing about my mind that has never once slowed down. $6,800 a month is $81,600 a year. Over 24 months, if he defaulted and it came back on the guarantor, that guarantor could be on the hook for the better part of $160,000 more. Add the HELOC he'd already drained, and my son had in about 5 weeks quietly reached into my life for something north of $340,000. $6,800 a month is a penthouse, a skyline, a wall of glass 30 floors up. It's the view a man buys when he wants to stand at a window at night with a drink in his hand and finally feel like he got away from where he came from the West Side, from the builder's shop, from his mother's ledgers. He didn't just want out. He wanted up, and he wanted me to pay for the elevator. Gloria, I said, I never signed a guarantee. The line went quiet in a way that told me she already knew that and had already been sitting with what it meant and hadn't wanted to be the one to say it. I know you didn't, she said finally. I pulled the HELOC file. The signature on the loan documents. She stopped, started again. Anna, it's your name, but it's not your hand. I've watched you sign checks for 20 years. Somebody made that signature, and the power of attorney they attach to authorize it is the 2019 limited one, the one from before your surgery. There it was. Let me lay it out the way I laid it out for myself that morning in my late husband's office with a cold cup of coffee and a legal pad, writing it all down in my own real handwriting so I could look at it as fact instead of feeling. Darnell had a key, the 2019 power of attorney, meant for small things while I healed. He used it to walk into the whole house. He took that limited POA to a lender and drew $180,000 against the Beatty's Ford property, the first house Sam and I ever bought, the burned shell I turned into the beginning of everything. He borrowed against my mother's history and my husband's hands to put down deposits and firsts and lasts on a life in Atlanta. Then, because the Atlanta lease needed a guarantor with real assets behind them, he did the second thing. He put my name on that guarantee. And when my name wasn't there to sign, somebody signed it for me. That is not forgetting to mention a move. Let me say the words plainly the way the law says them, because I would spend the coming months learning to say them without my voice shaking. An agent under a power of attorney is a fiduciary. That's the legal word for a person the law trusts. It's to act only in your interest, never their own. Reaching past the plain limits of that document to strip equity out of my property is a breach of fiduciary duty, and every state I know of treats it seriously when the money is large and the taking is deliberate. Signing my name to a bank instrument I never authorized is forgery. Using that forged signature and that overreached authority to pull out cash and secure a lease is fraud. And when it's done to an older person by someone in a position of trust, a good many prosecutors have another phrase for it: financial exploitation of an elder. These are not family disagreements. These are not "we got busy, mama." These are the kinds of words that come with case numbers and court dates, and in the worst cases with a man in a suit standing up and saying the state of North Carolina versus my own son, the state versus my own son. I wrote that phrase on the legal pad, and then I sat and looked at it until the letters stopped meaning anything. My son had committed a crime against me, and then he had called me on a Sunday light as heir to make sure I heard it from him as a moving announcement instead of from a lender as a lawsuit, so that by the time I understood, it would already feel too late and too tangled and too family to do anything about. He was managing me. My own child was managing me the way you manage a problem you expect to cry and then forgive. I sat with that for a long while. I'm not going to tell you I was calm. I want to be honest with you, because if I lie about the small things, you won't believe me about the big ones. I was not calm. My hands shook. My chest, the chest they'd opened in 2019, went tight and fluttery in a way that scared me, and I had to put my head down on Sam's old desk and breathe slow until it passed. There's a particular grief in learning that the person you'd have given everything to didn't even bother to ask because he assumed you were too small to say no. But somewhere in that breathing underneath the hurt, something older and colder woke up. The laundry paycheck woman. The one who looked at a burned-out house and saw a street. She'd been asleep a long time, folded away like the quilt in the cedar chest, and I'd half forgotten she was in there. She woke all the way up at Sam's desk that morning, and she has not gone back to sleep since. Because here's what my son didn't stop to consider in all his careful planning. $180,000 is a great deal of money to a man playing dress-up. It is not, it turns out, very much money at all against 41 doors held clean and a woman who has read a title search at her own kitchen table 10,000 times. Darnell had picked the one lock I'd left him, the 2019 key, the Beatty's Ford house, the small unlocked door of a healing mother's trust. He thought that door led to the whole house. He had no idea it led to a single room, and he had no idea why that room of all the rooms was the one I'd left unlocked. Something else nagged at me too, sitting there. 3 moves spaced weeks apart, sized just under the thresholds that make a bank ask questions. My Darnell is many things, but he is not patient, and he has never in his life been that careful with a dollar. Somebody had taught him to move money like that. Somebody was standing behind him whispering the steps. I didn't have the name yet. I would soon enough, and when I found it, I'd find out this was never really about a penthouse at all. I picked my head up off the desk. I clicked my pen. And on that legal pad, under the list of everything he'd done, I wrote one line in my own real steady, unforged hand. He thinks he took the house. He doesn't know I still hold the ground. Then I called Gloria back and told her 3 things. Don't freeze $1 yet. I didn't want him knowing anybody was awake in here. Don't say a word to a living soul. And pull me every document, every wire, every date, every signature going all the way back to 2019, and then pull the file on what I'd quietly done in the spring of 2023, the thing I'd never told Darnell or Vanessa or anyone but Gloria and one attorney downtown. Because if my son wanted to make a move on this family's money, he was about to learn that his mother had made her move 3 years before he ever thought of his. Gloria was quiet a moment, then she said, "Anna, I always wondered why you set that up back then. When there wasn't any trouble?" "There's always trouble coming, Gloria," I told her. "You just don't always know its name yet." Because a woman who has spent her whole life being underestimated learns one more thing, the most useful thing of all. You never let them know you've stopped being underestimated. Not until it can't help them anymore. Grief and strategy cannot live in the same room at the same time. I learned that the week after Gloria's call. So I made a decision sitting at Sam's desk that I would grieve later. I would give myself a whole season to grieve when this was done. And for now I would think. Just think. The way I thought about that burned-out house on Beatty's Ford Road 40 years ago. Not what has been done to me. What can be done. I want to be clear about something because it matters to me that you understand who I am. What I did over the next months was not revenge. I have watched people burn their own lives down for revenge, and it never once put out the fire that started it. No, I was correcting an error legally, precisely and permanently. There is a difference between a woman swinging a hammer and a woman reading a blueprint. I have always been the blueprint kind. The first thing I did was call an attorney. Not the family lawyer everyone knew, the one Darnell knew, the one whose number Darnell had. I wanted someone clean, someone downtown, someone who had never eaten at my table. Her name was Harper Coleman, an estate and elder law attorney with 15 years on her, and a way of listening that made you feel she'd already thought of the thing you were about to say. I sat in her office on a Tuesday morning, put my legal pad on her desk, and told her everything in order by date with the numbers. She read it twice. Then she took off her glasses and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to tell you 2 things. The first is that I'm sorry. The second is that your son made a serious mistake, and it's one the law knows how to answer." She walked me through it. The 2019 Power of Attorney was a limited instrument. It named specific ordinary acts. Drawing down $180,000 of equity is nowhere inside these 4 corners, she said, tapping the page. That's what we call acting ultra vires beyond the authority granted. And forging your name on a guarantee isn't gray at all. That's black and white. She could revoke the power of attorney immediately in writing with formal notice. She could send a demand and a fraud notice to the HELOC lender and put them on notice that the instrument was void. And she could engage a forensic document examiner, a professional who does nothing all day but compares signatures under magnification to establish on paper over a signature that the hand that signed that loan was not my hand. That last piece takes time, she warned me. A good examiner won't be rushed, and a rushed opinion is worthless in front of a judge. Weeks, not days. Are you in a hurry? I thought about it. No, I said. I'm in a pattern. Hurrying is what he did. I'd rather be right. She smiled at that, the first real smile of the meeting. Then we'll be right. Before I left her office that first day, I asked her to do one more thing, and I asked it quietly because it was the closest thing I had to a hidden card, and I did not want even the walls to hear it. In the spring of 2023, I said I set something up, through an attorney named Whitmore downtown before he retired. I've got the folder in my safe. I never told my son, never told Vanessa, never told a soul but Gloria and Whitmore. I want you to pull it, review every line of it, and tell me one thing. I met her eyes. Tell me whether it still holds, whether what I did in 2023 does what I built it to do even now, even against a court order, even against a guardian. I need to know the ground under my feet is really mine before I stand on it. Harper looked at me a moment, curious the way a good lawyer gets curious when a soft-spoken old woman turns out to have laid plans years before the trouble showed up. You set something up in 2023, she repeated slowly, when there wasn't any trouble. There's always trouble coming, I said. In 2023, I just didn't know its name yet. She said she'd pull the folder and read every word. She would call me when she'd finished, she said, and from the way she said it, I could tell she already suspected I'd handed her something that mattered more than everything else in the file combined. She was right, but that reckoning belongs later in its proper place, and I'd made my whole life out of not showing a card before its turn. The second thing I did was sit down with Gloria and follow the money like a bloodhound. 20 years of clean books meant every dollar had a footprint. We spread the statements across my dining table under the good lamp, and we went line by line, the two of us. Two black women past 60 with reading glasses and a pot of coffee, doing the thing men like Roland Pierce never expect anyone to do, actually reading the paper. We traced the $180,000 out of the HELOC and watched where it went. Deposits firsts and lasts on the penthouse, a leased German car that cost more than my first 3 houses, combined $11,000 at a furniture showroom in Buckhead. A watch Gloria, $4,000 on a watch, when I'd raised him to fix a used one, and then a chunk of it, $40,000, moved in 2 transfers into an account that had nothing to do with Atlanta apartments at all. That $40,000 went out to a limited liability company I'd never heard of, and that more than the penthouse, more than the forgery, was the thread that unraveled everything. Because my son is not careful with money, never has been spent his allowance the day he got it. His whole childhood, and someone had made that $40,000 disappear very carefully indeed, routed and retitled, the way a man hides a fee he doesn't want examined. Somebody was being paid. Somebody was standing behind my son with a handout. Whoever taught him to break up that HELOC into 3 pieces under the reporting line, Gloria said, tapping the statement, is whoever got paid that $40,000. Anna, this isn't your boy's mind. Your boy couldn't structure his way out of a paper bag. This is somebody's system. Then let's find out whose, I said. The third thing I did was keep my face exactly the same. This was the hardest part, and I want to be honest about the cost of it. I kept texting my grandbabies. Grandma loves you. Did you like the new school? Send me a picture of your room. And I meant every word, which is what made it hard. My love for Malik and Zoe was never a strategy. It was the one true thing standing in the middle of all the lies, and I would not let my son's crime turn it into a weapon. If I stopped texting them, he'd know something had changed, so I kept on loving them out loud across 3 states into a silence that mostly didn't answer, and that silence told me something too. Roland Pierce. That was the name on the $40,000 LLC once Gloria and Harper's paralegal peeled back a layer or 2. He called himself a wealth strategist. He had a website with a photograph of a lighthouse on it, and a lot of words like legacy and positioning and generational. The kind of words that sound like money to people who don't have any and have decided that's the world's fault. He ran seminars in hotel ballrooms. He found men like my son men with a chip on the shoulder and an inheritance in the distance, and he taught them to reach for it early. I found him in Darnell's world without Darnell ever knowing I was looking. A men's group at a downtown Atlanta church. A tagged photo, the 2 of them, at some ribbon cutting my son grinning that grin Roland Pierce with his hand on Darnell's shoulder like a fisherman posing with his catch. I looked at that photograph a long time. Because I have known men like Roland Pierce my whole life. They never rob you themselves. They teach a hungrier man to do it and take a cut for the lesson. So I did to Roland Pierce what nobody thinks a church grandmother knows how to do. I looked him up. Quietly through Harper's paralegal in a couple of afternoons on the county court websites of 3 states the way I once read title searches at my kitchen table. And Roland Pierce, it turned out, had a footprint too. 2 civil suits in Georgia, both settled quiet, both brought by families, one of them by a widow's daughter alleging he'd advised his way into an old woman's assets through a son who'd been given power of attorney. A pattern. My son wasn't Roland Pierce's protege. My son was Roland Pierce's product. There'd been others before us, and there'd be others after, unless somebody who'd read the paper decided to stop being quiet at exactly the right moment. I wrote his name on my legal pad and underlined it twice. Not yet, I told myself. But you, Mr. Pierce, are going in the folder, too. And then Harper called me on a Thursday afternoon with the piece that changed the shape of everything, and I had to sit down on the stairs to hear it. Anna, she said we were past Mrs. Whitfield by then. I've been doing some checking quietly through a contact at the Mecklenburg clerk's office. There's a filing being prepared. Not filed yet. Being prepared. She took a breath. It's a petition to have you declared legally incompetent, to appoint a guardian of your estate. In plain terms, Anna, it's a conservatorship. Your son is getting ready to ask a court to declare that you can't manage your own affairs and to hand control of everything, the whole company, to him. The stairs were cold under me. On what grounds? I said. My voice came out very flat. There's nothing wrong with my mind. They're building a record, she said gently. There's a private duty nurse who's been paid to visit you twice. Do you remember the woman from the senior wellness service? I did remember. A pleasant young woman had come by twice unannounced, said she was doing free checkups for seniors in the neighborhood through the church. I'd given her sweet tea. I'd been glad of the company. and she had been writing me down. "There are notes," Harper said. "Notes that say you seemed confused. Notes that mention your heart surgery, your medications. And Anna, I'm sorry to ask this. Is it true? Your heart's been giving you trouble again because that's in there too. They're using your actual illness to make the story credible." I closed my eyes and I understood the whole shape of it at once, the way you understand a chess position, 2 moves before you'd have felt the check. This was never about a penthouse. The penthouse was the cover. A man who's about to try to take his mother's entire company doesn't want her watching him closely, so first he moves 3 states away and tells her it was an accident, an oversight. We just forgot, so she'll be hurt and quiet and distracted, grieving in her kitchen, while 3 states away he and Roland Pierce quietly assemble the paperwork to have her erased. Not killed, erased, declared unable. A signature on a court order, and Miss Anna, who bakes pies, becomes a ward, and her son signs for the 41 doors and the trust and everything forever legally with the full weight of the state of North Carolina behind him. And the cruelest part, the part that Roland Pierce surely coached, was that it would work better, because my heart really was failing. The truest, most frightening thing about my body, the surgery that nearly took me, was going to be turned into the evidence that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. My weakness wasn't just being exploited, it was being entered into the record. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Before they file, weeks, maybe. They want the medical picture built up first. Once it's filed, there'll be a hearing." She paused. "Anna, I have to be straight with you. These cases are not automatic wins for the person being protected. If there's a real diagnosis in there, and a heart condition, and a couple of professional-looking notes, and a devoted son standing up in court saying I only want to take care of my mother, judges have signed off on less. We can fight it, but we have to fight it right, and we cannot let them know we're fighting until we're ready." I sat on my stairs with the phone against my ear, 64 years old, my chest tight, and for the first time since Gloria's call, I felt something that was not cold and was not strategy. It was fear, real fear, because a man taking your money is one thing. A man taking yourself, your name, your competence, your right to sign for your own life, that is another thing entirely, and I did not know yet whether I was strong enough to stop it. The call from Malik came 2 days later. It came at 9 at night from Vanessa's number, and when I answered expecting my daughter-in-law, it was my grandson's small, serious voice whispering, "Grandma, it's Malik. I'm not supposed to be on Mama's phone." A pause, the sound of a door. "Grandma, are you sick? Daddy told Miss Zoe and me that you got sick in your head and you don't remember us anymore, and that's why we can't call you. But you texted me happy birthday, so I don't think that's true. Is that true?" I gripped the banister. Somewhere in Atlanta, my son was telling my grandchildren that I had lost my mind, was poisoning them against me in advance, so that when the court paper came and Grandma disappeared from their lives, they'd already have a story for why. "No, baby," I said, and I kept my voice as steady and warm as a Sunday morning. "Grandma's mind is just fine. Grandma remembers every single thing about you. I remember you were born on a Tuesday in a thunderstorm, and you didn't cry, you just looked around like you were taking notes." He laughed a wet little laugh. "You listen to me, Malik. No matter what anybody tells you, your grandma loves you, and your grandma is not going anywhere. You hold on to that. Can you do that for me?" "Yeah," he whispered. And then, before he hung up, he said the thing that turned the whole case. "Mama cried Grandma. She and Daddy had a big fight. Mama said, 'I'm not doing that to your mother, Darnell. That's a step too far.' And Daddy said, 'Be quiet.' And then Mama took me and Zoe to get ice cream, and she was crying the whole time. 'I'm not doing that to your mother. That's a step too far.'" I sat down on the stairs again, slow, because everything I thought I understood had just tilted, and a door I hadn't known was there had opened a crack. The summons came on a gray Wednesday. I want to tell you it came with drums and lightning, but the terrible things come quiet. A process server, a polite young man at my door at 10 in the morning, a single sheet of paper. In the matter of the incompetency of Anna Ruth Whitfield. My name, my mother's name in the middle of mine, printed on a court form under the word incompetency. A hearing date, my son's name as petitioner. I held it in my kitchen where I'd held the phone the day this started in the same gray light, and I made myself read it 3 times so it couldn't sneak up on me later. Then I put it in the folder with everything else, and I did something I had been putting off for weeks. Gloria drove me. I won't pretend I was steady enough to drive to Atlanta. There was a storage unit Harper had learned that Darnell had rented and then stopped paying on one of those places that auctions your things if you fall behind. The management had emailed a final notice to the company address, the way everything seemed to come to the company address, and I wanted to see what my son had thought so little of that he'd let it go to a stranger's auction rather than pay $40 to keep it. The unit door rolled up on a smell of mildew and old cardboard. It was mostly junk, a broken lamp, boxes of clothes gone stiff, a crib mattress. The debris of people who buy new things to feel new. Gloria stayed by the car. I went in alone with a little flashlight, and I moved boxes and near the back, shoved under a leaking window unit that had been sat on top of it to keep it from rocking, I found it. My mother's quilt. They had used it as a rag, as padding. The blue that was my great-aunt Pearl was black with mildew. The strip of my great-grandfather's Sunday shirt had a boot print on it. Someone had wiped something grease oil, I don't know, across the corner where the christening squares were the babies, and it had dried stiff and brown. The seams my mother used to run her finger along, naming the dead, naming my people one by one. They were splitting, coming apart, letting the patches go. They could keep us off the land. They couldn't keep us off each other. I got down on the concrete floor of that storage unit, 64 years old, in my good coat, and I picked up my mother's quilt and held it against me the way you hold a child, and for the first and only time in this whole story, I cried. Not pretty crying, the kind that comes up from a place you didn't know was still open. Everything I had been holding back with strategy and legal pads and steady warm phone voices came up at once, because this was the thing under all the other things. They hadn't just moved away. They hadn't just taken money. They had taken the one deed my mother ever owned, the proof that we came from people who survived on purpose, and they had wiped their floors with it and left it to be auctioned to a stranger. They had thrown my dead away. And then my heart, my repaired, tired, 64-year-old heart began to pound hard and wrong, skipping and lurching, and a gray started to come in at the edges of my sight. I had to lie back against a stranger's boxes on that cold floor and put my hand flat on my chest and breathe slow, the way they taught me after the surgery, and for one long moment alone on the floor of that storage unit with the ruined quilt across my lap, I truly did not know if my body would let me get up, or if this was where it ended, where they'd find me, and how neat that would be for their court paper. She was found collapsed, confused, alone. I don't know how long I lay there, but I know what got me up. It wasn't anger, though. The anger was there. It was my mother's voice out of that quilt out of 40 years gone. They could take near about everything. They couldn't keep us off each other. I was not fighting for money anymore. Somewhere on that floor I stopped fighting for money entirely, and I don't think I ever picked it back up. I was fighting for the right to have existed, for the right of my mother to have existed, and her mother all the way back to the woman who sewed the dead into cloth, so her children would have somebody to belong to when the world gave them nothing. My son wanted a court to say I was no one, that I couldn't be trusted with my own name. And I decided on that concrete floor with my heart still stumbling that he was going to learn exactly whose name it was. I folded the quilt gently the way you fold a flag, and I carried it out to the car, and I laid it across my lap, and I said to Gloria, "Take me home. We have work to do." And she looked at my face, and she didn't say a word about the tears. She just started the car. A frightened woman and a decided woman can look exactly alike from the outside. That was the last thing my son ever understood about me, and it was the thing that beat him. The morning after Atlanta, I walked into Harper Coleman's office, and I was decided. We moved on 3 tracks at once, and we moved quiet. Track 1, the paper. Harper revoked the 2019 power of attorney formally with notice to the lender and to Darnell, but timed and worded so it read like routine housekeeping, an old document being tidied up, nothing that would spook him before the hearing. She filed our answer to the incompetency petition, and she engaged the forensic document examiner, a careful woman named Dr. Ellison, who spent 3 weeks with the HELOC signature and my real signatures, and came back with an opinion written in the flat. Certain language courts respect the signature on the loan was not written by the same hand that wrote the exemplars. Not probably, not likely. A qualified professional's opinion on paper that my son had forged my name. Track 2, my mind. This was the piece Harper cared about most, and she was right to. "They're going to stand up and say your heart is failing, and your memory with it," she said. "So before they can say it, we're going to prove the opposite on the record in a way they can't answer." She arranged for me to be evaluated not by my own doctor, who could be called biased, but by an independent geriatric specialist and a neuropsychologist, both of my choosing the whole assessment recorded on video with my consent. I sat through hours of it. Remember these words. Count backward by sevens. Draw this clock. Who is the governor? What did you have for breakfast, and what were you doing on this date? And explain to me, Mrs. Whitfield, in your own words, the structure of your family's holdings. I explained the structure of my family's holdings to that neuropsychologist for 40 minutes, without a note in front of me, every property, every purchase price, every year. When I finished, he set down his pen and said, "Ma'am, I've evaluated 300 people for capacity. I'd like you to manage my estate." The report came back the way I knew it would. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Full decisional capacity. On video. Time-stamped. 2 weeks before the hearing. Track 3 was the dangerous one, and it nearly came apart. Because we had frozen the auto transfers and canceled the supplementary cards done properly in writing, as the lawful owner reasserting control, and my son was not stupid enough to miss it forever. On a Monday, Gloria called me, and for once her steady voice was tight. "He called the office, Darnell, just now." She let out a breath. "He was fishing Anna. Real careful. Said he'd noticed some issues with the accounts and wanted to make sure everything was okay with Mama's finances given her health. Given her health. He was trying to find out how much you know, and whether you're the one who did it, or whether She stopped. "Or whether I'm too far gone to have done it myself," I finished. Which is exactly the story he needs to be true. What do I tell him? And here is where being underestimated my whole life finally fully paid. Because I understood my son's need better than he understood it himself. He needed me to be failing. His entire plan, his self-image, his story to the court and to his children and to himself. All of it required a mother who was slipping. So I would give it to him. I would feed the very hunger that was about to walk him into a courtroom. "Tell him you're worried about me, too," I said. "Tell him I've seemed forgetful. Tell him I asked you the same question twice last week and couldn't find my checkbook. Sound concerned, Gloria. Sound like you might even be on his side." I heard her draw breath to object. "It's not a lie you're telling a good man, Gloria. It's bait you're setting for a thief. Let him walk into that courtroom certain that he's about to win. A man who's certain doesn't prepare for a fight." She did it beautifully. And I have thought since about the strangeness of it, that the last useful thing my performance of weakness ever did was convince my own son to underestimate me one final fatal time. The performance cost me, though. I want you to know that. 3 days before the hearing, Darnell called me himself the first time he'd called since the Sunday of the pies. And I understood the moment I heard his voice go soft and sorrowful that this call was for the record, that he might even be recording it, building one last exhibit, the loving son gently checking on his failing mother. "Mama," he said, warm as pie. "I've just been so worried about you. Gloria says you've been having a hard time, forgetting things. You know you can tell me anything, right? I just want to take care of you now. Let me carry the load." And I sat in Sam's chair with my mother's ruined quilt folded on the desk in front of me and Dr. Ellison's forgery report in the drawer, and I made myself do the hardest thing in this whole story. Harder than the storage floor. I made my voice small and grateful and a little lost, and I said, "Oh, baby, it's been so hard since your daddy passed. I get so turned around sometimes. It's a comfort to know you're looking out for your mama." I heard him relax through the phone. I heard him believe it, my own child glad to hear that I was slipping because it meant his plan was working. "You're a good son," I told him, and the words came out steady, and I hated every one of them, and I meant for him to remember later that I'd said them. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, and my heart was doing its wrong little dance, and I put my palm flat on the quilt until it settled. Soon I told the seams. Soon they'll know who you named. I had let my son hear his mother beaten, so that in 3 days he would walk into that courtroom with no armor on at all. It was the cruelest thing I did in this entire affair, and I would do it again without blinking. There was one thing left to do before the hearing, and it was the only part of the plan that wasn't cold. It was warm, and it was a gamble, and it was aimed at the crack in the door that Malik had opened. I called Vanessa, not to accuse her, to show her something. I asked her to meet me alone the next time she was in Charlotte, visiting her own mother, which Gloria's careful watching told me would be that Friday. I met her at a diner off Independence, a plain public place, and I brought a folder. She came in braced for a fight, chin up, ready for the wicked mother-in-law. And I didn't fight her. I ordered her a coffee. And then I opened the folder and I laid it out in front of her, quiet, 1 page at a time. Here is the HELOC. Here is my real signature. Here is the forged one. Look at the R. Vanessa look. how he never could make my R. Here is Dr. Ellison's report. And here I turned the last page. Here is the petition, the one with the word incompetency over my name filed by your husband, to have a court declare me out of my mind and hand him everything. Here is the nurse's note that used my heart surgery against me. Here is the story your husband told my grandchildren that Grandma got sick in her head and doesn't remember them. Vanessa stopped drinking her coffee somewhere around the forged signature. By the petition, her hand was over her mouth. And when I set down the last page, the nurse's note, she was crying. Not the loud kind, the kind that just runs down a still face. He told me it was only the apartment, she whispered. The guarantee, the loan he said you knew. He said you'd offered that it was an advance on the inheritance. I believed him because I wanted to. Because I wanted the... She gestured helpless at a life at granite countertops at a skyline. I knew that was wrong, and I let myself not know it. But this, she put 2 fingers on the petition like it was hot. This I said no to. I told him, Darnell, that is a step too far, that is your mother. He said I didn't understand strategy. He said Roland said it was the only way to protect the family's future. She looked up at me, ruined. It was always Roland. Every crazy thing this year started with something Roland said. I let that sit. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Vanessa, if a judge asks you under oath what your husband told you, will you tell the truth? She looked at me for a long moment. This frightened girl who'd married my son to keep the lights on, who'd let herself not know a great deal, but who had drawn one line and held it. And she said, he forged your name and told your grandbabies you were crazy. Her voice hardened into something I'd never heard in her before. Yes, I'll tell the truth. I closed the folder. The trap was built. The bait was set, and now the one witness I could never have bought had chosen on her own to walk in on my side. I drove home and laid the ruined quilt across my knees and looked at it a long time in the evening light. Soon, I thought. Soon. Whatever my son thought he was walking into on the day of that hearing, it was not the room he was going to find. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a courtroom in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, and my son walked in like a man who'd already won. I watched him from my seat beside Harper. He wore a suit I'd never seen, and he'd shaved close, and he had arranged his face into a mask of tired, loving worry, the good son carrying a heavy burden he never asked for. He didn't look at me at first, and when he finally did, he gave me a small, sad, gentle smile, the smile you give a mother you've decided is already gone. It was, I think, the smile of a man being coached from a hotel ballroom, and Roland Pierce was not in that courtroom to see how it landed. Roland Pierce is never in the room. That's the whole business. His attorney stood first, and I will tell you the truth for a while. It was bad. He was good, that lawyer. He laid it out gently, reasonably, which is the frightening way. A devoted son. A mother of 64 with a serious cardiac condition, operated on just a few years back on a raft of medications. He entered the nurse's notes. Client appeared confused as to date. Client repeated herself. Family reports increasing forgetfulness. He entered my medical records, the real ones, the heart that really was tired. He never once raised his voice. He just built brick, by reasonable brick, a picture of a frail old woman and a son who loved her too much to watch her be taken advantage of, by whom we can only wonder, Your Honor. But her accounts have been in disarray. He turned my own protection of myself into evidence of my confusion, and I watched the judge listen. I watched him glance at me over his glasses, an old black woman still hands folded saying nothing, and I watched him half believe it. I felt the room tilt. Harper had warned me. These are not automatic wins. For one long, cold minute, sitting in that courtroom while a stranger described me as something broken, I felt the floor of the storage unit again under me, felt my heart give its wrong little skip, and I thought he might actually do it. He might actually win. Then Harper Coleman stood up. She didn't argue. She showed. That was the whole difference between her and the man across the aisle. He built a story and she turned on a light. First, the video. She played for the court the recording of my capacity evaluation, the independent geriatric specialist, the neuropsychologist, both of my own, choosing the whole thing, time-stamped 2 weeks earlier. The room watched me on that screen recite the structure of 41 properties from memory purchase prices and years without a note. They watched the neuropsychologist set down his pen and say he'd like me to manage his estate. The report was entered, no evidence of cognitive impairment. Full decisional capacity. I watched the judge's face change. I watched the nurse's little notes turn to dust in the air. Second, the signature. Harper called Dr. Ellison the forensic document examiner, who explained in her flat, certain unshakable way how she had compared the signature on a $180,000 loan against 30 examples of my true hand, and how the loan signature was not written by Anna Whitfield. She put the two signatures side by side on the big screen enlarged. "Note the formation of the letter R," she said, and the whole courtroom looked at the place where my son could never quite make my R, and understood all at once, and without anyone having to say it, that the devoted son had forged his mother's name. I saw Darnell's face come apart just slightly at the edges. Third, Harper called Vanessa. My daughter-in-law walked to the stand in a plain dress, and she did not look at her husband, and she told the truth under oath. That Darnell had told her the loan and the guarantee were in advance, I'd offered a lie. That when he'd proposed the incompetency petition, she had told him to his face it was a step too far, that it was his own mother. That he'd said she didn't understand strategy, that Roland said it was the only way. And quietly, and this is the part that broke the room, that her husband had told their two small children their grandmother had gotten sick in her head and no longer remembered them, so that they would not ask why Grandma was gone. There was no coming back from that. You could feel it. A man can survive being called a thief in a courtroom. He cannot survive a mother in the gallery hearing that he told her grandbabies she'd lost her mind so he could take her name off her own life. The judge dismissed the petition from the bench. He used words like "no basis whatsoever" and "deeply troubling conduct by the petitioner," and he said, looking down at my son, that he had rarely seen a proceeding brought in worse faith. My competence was affirmed on the record, permanent, unassailable. And then Harper Coleman did the thing I had been saving for last. She rose one more time and said, "Your Honor, in the interest of a complete record, and so that everyone in this room understands what was actually at stake here, I'd like to enter one final document. The 2023 Trust. Here is what my son learned in that courtroom 3 years too late. In the spring of 2023, when he'd first started dropping hints about simplifying my estate hints, I'd smiled at and filed away, I had quietly moved almost the whole of Whitfield Holdings, every property but one, into an irrevocable trust. Gloria was named independent co-trustee, so no single person, not even me, could be leaned on alone. The trust contained an incapacity provision that named the physicians I had chosen to judge my capacity, not a court, not a nurse bought by a stranger. And it contained a no-contest clause. Anyone who challenged it or moved against me to seize control forfeited every dollar they might ever have inherited. Do you understand what that means? It means that even if my son had won that day, even if the judge had believed the nurse's notes and the tired heart and the loving son's smile, even if they'd declared me incompetent and handed Darnell a guardianship, he would have controlled nothing. The company was never in the estate they were fighting over. It hadn't been for 3 years. The whole scheme, the move to Atlanta, the forged loan, the bought nurse, the poisoning of my grandchildren, Roland Pierce's $40,000 of strategy, all of it was built to seize a house that I had quietly walked out of and locked behind me before he ever picked up the first brick. And the one house I'd left standing in the open, the Beatty's Ford property, the single unlocked room, I'd left it unlocked on purpose years back, the way you leave one door open to see who comes through it in the night. My son came through it, and in coming through it, under that no-contest clause he had, triggered the forfeiture of everything he might ever have received from me. He didn't just fail to take what was mine, he threw away what would one day have been his. I stood up then. Not because I had to, the judge had already ruled, but because there is a thing a mother needs to say to a son, and it needs to be said standing. I walked to where he sat, my son, with his close shave and his ruined suit and his face that couldn't decide what to be. And I did not raise my voice because I have never needed to. I said, "You didn't lose today, Darnell. You lost the day you decided your mother's love was something you could forge a signature on." Then I picked up my folder, and I walked out of that courtroom into the ordinary daylight, and I left him sitting there in the wreckage of the house he'd spent a year breaking into, only to find it empty, only to find that his mother had been 3 whole years ahead of him the entire time. I did not send my son to prison. I could have. Harper had it built and ready, the forgery, the fraud, the exploitation of an elder, all of it documented a case a prosecutor would have been glad to take. For a few days I held that power in my hand and felt the weight of it, and I understood finally that using it would not put out a single flame. It would only teach my grandchildren that their grandmother was the woman who put their father in a cell. That is not the deed I wanted to leave them. So I made him an offer in writing through Harper with terms. No prison if he accepted in a signed document full responsibility for what he'd done, if he entered counseling and stayed in it, if he repaid the $180,000 not with money he didn't have, but with labor, real work managing the maintenance and books of the very properties he'd tried to steal under Gloria's eye for as long as it took learning at last what $1 costs a body to earn. And if he cut Roland Pierce out of his life completely, and this part was not optional, gave a full account of Roland Pierce to my attorney so that Roland Pierce's careful $40,000 systems could be handed to people in Georgia who had been looking for exactly that account for a long time. 2 families had sued him and settled quiet. I had no intention of being quiet. Mr. Pierce would find that the church grandmother who read the paper was the last catch he ever posed with. Darnell signed. Weak men always do in the end, and I say that with more sorrow than contempt because he is still my son, and I raised him, and some of how he turned out is a bill that comes to me, too. The change in him did not come fast, and I did not let myself hope too early because hope offered too soon to a man like my son is just another thing for him to disappoint. The first months were sullen. He worked the properties because the alternative was a courtroom, not because he'd understood anything, and I could see the resentment on him like a coat. But something happens to a proud man when he has to climb into the crawl space of a house he once dreamed of owning to fix a tenant's burst pipe at 11 at night in February. Somewhere around the 4th or 5th month, I stopped hearing the resentment. He called me one evening, not for the record this time, not coach just a tired man on a phone, and he said, "Mama Mrs. Tillman in the Tryon Street unit. Her heat went out and she's 80. I stayed till it was fixed. I just wanted to tell somebody." And I understood that he was learning at 40 when the thing I'd tried to give him at 10, and he'd refused, that a building full of people you keep warm is worth more than a window you stand behind. It was a small thing, but I have built a whole life out of small things that turned out to be foundations. The children came to live with me for a season, Malik and Zoe through a proper temporary guardianship arranged in that same courthouse with a judge's signature and a real visitation schedule while their parents found their feet. Nothing signed at a gate. Nothing snatched. Done right out in the open the way I do things. Vanessa began coming around quiet at first ashamed and then less ashamed and then slowly like family. She got a job. She started on her own to become someone whose safety didn't depend on a man's costume. I think she'll make it. I think of all of them, she was the one who was only ever scared, and scared is a thing you can grow out of if somebody shows you how. And the money I fought a year to protect, I did not spend it on lobster and wine. I have never in my life wanted lobster and wine. I took a piece of Whitfield Holdings and I built the Ruth Whitfield Legacy Fund named for my mother, who came up out of Mississippi with a suitcase and a quilt. It helps young people from the West Side and the South End go to school, and it helps families. Black families, scared families, families one broken furnace from the car put a down payment on the first house they will ever own. A deed, a real one, the kind my mother was never allowed to hold. I had the quilt restored. I found a woman 2 counties over who does that work, who takes the ruined and the split apart and the mildewed and brings it back without pretending the damage never happened. You can still see if you look where it was hurt. It hangs in my front room now where the light hits it in the afternoon, and when the children visit, I sit them down in front of it, and I run my finger along the seams, and I name them one by one the way my mother named them to me. This here's your Uncle Nathaniel. This blue is your Great Aunt Pearl. So they'll know. So they'll always know they came from people who survived on purpose. My name is Anna Ruth Whitfield. I am 64 years old. My son thought I was the soft part of the family, the part you could move away from, borrow against, sign for, and set aside. He forgot who taught him the word family in the first place. A quilt is just soft cloth until you learn it was stitched to survive. So was I.